Welcome to the ChopMan tutorial series. Based on the beloved classic arcade game Pac-Man, this project was created to be an easy-to-follow step-by-step guide that would give you the tools, techniques, and experience of creating a full game from start to finish. We've made all the original assets that we created for the game completely free. Links in the description below. For this project, if you wish to follow along step by step, you will need to first download the ChopMan project files, both of which can be downloaded in the downloads area of the tutorial site or from links in the description.
In this Games Without Code video, we're going to create our main menu using Playmaker. To begin, we're going to go to our ChopMan folder, and under textures, if we go to our UI folder, we can see the different UI elements that we have to create our menu. So we'll begin by selecting our ChopMan title screen sprite sheet, and we can see that in our inspector that this sprite mode is set to single. So the first thing we want to do is under our sprite mode, we want to change that from single to multiple. And once we have that, we're going to click apply. So next thing that we're going to do is we're going to open up our sprite editor. So in our sprite editor, we're going to take our sprite sheet and create individual sprites from it. So to do that, we can left click and drag, and we can see that we now have a binding box around our sprite. So with our binding box around our sprite, if we want to remove all this empty area that we have between the end of our sprite and the background, if we click on the trim button, we can see that it now removes all the empty background space and selects only the pixels within our defined sprite bounding box. So we're going to hit apply, and if we go back out to our inspector, we can see that we now have that game over separated as its own sprite. What we want to do now is we want to separate all these elements into their own individual sprites. Now, along with being able to left click and drag and creating a sprite, we can also additionally go under our slice drop down and set this to automatic, and if we click slice, we can see that Unity has now separated each of these elements into individual sprites. However, some of the elements, such as our text element, instead of needing to be individual sprites, we all need these as one sprite. So we're going to hit revert to remove the slice that we just did, and essentially we're going to just draw a bounding box over each of these additional sprite elements. So instead of constantly having to go back into the top and essentially going to our trim, what we can do also is we can hold shift and press T, which is the hotkey for the trim within the sprite editor window. So once we have all our sprites cut out, if we click on our sprite, we can see that at the bottom of our screen, we have a sprite information box which tells us the name, the position, its height, and its width. So in order to keep the scenes better organized, we're going to go and we're going to rename our sprites. So once we have all our sprites renamed, we're going to hit apply, and I'm going to close out of our sprite editor, and we can now see if we expand our sprite, all of our sprites in our sprite sheet separated and renamed. Now for our menu, we're only going to be using a few of these. However, we put several extra sprites on here that can be used when creating your game. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to right click and we're going to go under UI and we're going to select image. And we can see once we do that, we now have a canvas and an image game object, as well as our canvas components and our UI and image components as well. And additionally, we have this event system. So the first thing that we're going to do before we begin is we're going to go under canvas. Instead of having this as a screen space overlay, we're going to set this to a screen space camera. So this is just a matter of personal preference. So essentially this just makes our canvas a lot smaller and more manageable. So if we set it on overlay, we can see that our UI and our canvas and our UI is much larger. So this just allows us to work with a lot more manageable size within our scene. So next thing, we're going to go to our plane distance, and instead of 100, we're going to set our plane distance to 20. So we're going to select our camera and we're going to change that from perspective to orthographic. And we're going to decrease our size from 5 and we're going to decrease that down to 2. Additionally, we're going to go with our far, and instead of 100, we're going to make that 25. And we're also going to set our canvas scale, and we're going to set that to scale with screen size. And for our resolution, we're going to go 1920 by 1080. If we look within our scene, we can see that we have a much smaller canvas, a much more manageable work area. So the first thing we want to do is we want to adjust our anchor points. And we want to have the anchor points for our image stretching out to the width and height of our canvas. So to do that, we're going to click our anchor preset box, and by holding Shift and Alt, if we click the bottom right, we can now see that it not only adjusts our anchor points, but it also adjusts the image within it as well. So first thing that we're going to do is we're going to load in our background image. We're going to move that into our image sprite, and we're going to turn off ray tracing for this. And let's rename this to background image. Next, we're going to duplicate our background image, and we're going to get our arcade cabinet frame. So we're going to select that sprite and we're going to drag that into our images component. And let's rename this to arcade frame. Next, we're going to duplicate that once again, and we're going to grab our vignette and we're going to move that. Let's then select our arcade frame game object and let's duplicate that once more. I'm going to move that right before the frame vignette, and we're going to place our ChopMan logo. So by holding Shift, we can select our anchor points and our image will scale with our anchor points. Additionally, if we go into our inspector with our logo game object selected and click on preserve aspect ratio, we can see that it now keeps the aspect ratio despite the size of our rect transform and our anchor points. So this way it'll allow us to know that our image or our logos aren't being stretched and it has the correct proportions based on the aspect ratio. So let's rename this game object. And let's duplicate our logo. And for this, we're going to move this down by holding Shift and Control, grabbing our anchor points. We can move our object as well as our anchor points and keep that positioning together. So within our sprite sheet, we're going to go and we're going to select our play button. And we're going to replace that ChopMan logo with our play button. And we just want to make sure that our play button is fairly big and prominent within our menu. So for our play button, we want to go inside our inspector. We want to make sure that ray trace target is on. And we also want to add a button component. And for the last piece of our menu, what we're going to do is we're going to take our background image, we're going to duplicate this, we're going to move it up to right under our background image, and we're going to remove our image from here, and we're just going to call this black screen. Now that our setup is complete, it's time to add in our functionality. Now, the first thing that we want to do is we need to add on iTween. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with iTween or the newer version, DoTween, both are a fast and easy way to animate Unity components in C# or visual scripting. So if we go into our Playmaker folder under our editor and in the install subfolder, we should see a legacy iTween Unity package. However, if we add on the iTween actions using this Unity package, we'll most likely get an error. So what we want to do is go to the asset store, and in the asset store, we want to go to iTween. So once we brought iTween up in the asset store, we're going to click download. And once the file is finished downloading, we're going to click import. We're going to import it into our scene. And once Unity has finished importing it, we're going to go to our legacy iTween package. And we're going to import our legacy iTween package. We can see that we now have our iTween actions for Playmaker, and we don't have any errors. So we can see that our script actually imported successfully. So once we've imported the iTween actions into Playmaker, let's start developing our functionality. So we're going to first right click and we're going to create a new game object, and we're going to name this game object FSMs. And this is just a way of organizing our scene that we know that all of our Playmaker state machines are under one game object and are easy to find. So next we're going to create another game object, and we're going to call this main menu manager. So with our main menu manager, we're going to go into our Playmaker window and we're going to add a FSM. And let's name our FSM to main menu manager FSM. So before we get started, let's first walk through the logic that we want to create for our menu. So we want when our menu starts that the player is met with the black screen, and the black screen slowly fades away, revealing the background. Once the background is revealed, we want our logo to pop up, and then we want our play button to pop up as well. After the play button pops onto the screen, it will also pulsate, getting smaller and larger slightly, indicating to the player that that needs to be pressed. And we also want some movement in our background as well, so we don't want it to be on a static screen, so we want the background to slowly move around, indicating movement to the player. So let's get started. The first thing that we want to do is we need to create some variables to store our game objects. So the objects we want to store are our title screen as well as our play button. And we also want to store the size of our logo in our play button. So let's go into our variable tab, and we're going to go and we're going to create two game object variables. We're going to name the first one logo obj, and we're going to name the second one play button obj. And we want to make these both available in the inspector as well. Next, we want to create two variables for our vectors as well. So we're going to call the first one logo original scale vector 3, and the next one is going to be play button original scale vector 3. Once we have that created, we can set the logo object and the play button values to our logo and our play button game objects. Once we've got that done, we can go to our start state, and we need to get two get scale actions and two set scale actions. So we want to start with our get scale. And for our get scale, what we want to do is specify our game object, and we want that to be our logo game object. And we want our vector to be our logo original scale vector 3. And then we want to go to our set scale. We want to specify that, and we want that to be our logo object as well. And we're going to go to 0, 0, 0 as the scale that it sets. So next we're going to duplicate both our get scale as well as our set scale. And instead of our logo, we're going to use our play button. So we're going to hold Control, and then we're going to click our state to create a finish event, and with Control still held, we're going to drag out, and we're going to create a new state. And within this new state, what we want to do is we want to set our black screen color as well as create our black screen background fade. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our black screen object, and let's first go to our game menu manager, And we're going to lock that in so that our Playmaker item doesn't change. And we're going to get our black screen object. With the new state we created selected, we're going to grab our image component and we're going to drag that into our state within Playmaker. And we want to go to set properties. And within the set properties, we want to click on our property dropdown and we want to click our color and we're going to set that color to black, making sure that our alpha is set to 100. And next we're going to duplicate that. Again, we're going to click our properties dropdown and under color, we're going to go to A for alpha. And now we have our set value. So we want to create a value that represents the alpha for the color of our image component. So we want to click set value and we're going to create a new variable and we're going to call that variable black screen alpha value. And we want to start our black screen alpha value at 1. Since 1 means our color is fully visible and 0 means our color is no longer visible. So the next thing we're going to do is we need a float subtract, which is going to subtract the alpha value over time. And from there, we're going to use a float compare to say once that is set to 0, we want that to transition to the next state. So for our float subtract value, we want the value that it subtracts from is going to be our black screen alpha value. And for the sake of testing, we can go to about 0.3. We want that to happen per second and every frame. And we want to have our float compare, and the value that we want to compare is our black screen alpha value. And we want to also, while we're subtracting that, we need to set the property of our black screen alpha so it can show that transition over time. So we're just going to set that to every frame. So with that complete, we can go to test this out. But before we do, let's create our next transition event so we don't have this red error message. So we're going to go to our events and we're going to add a new event. We're going to call this event scale logo. And we're going to right click and we're going to say add global transition, and we want to add that scale logo transition. So now within our float compare, we're going to say less than, and we want that to go to scale logo. All right, now we have everything in place. Let's test it out. And if we go into our black screen object, we can see that our alpha is now set to 0. And we can also see that it's now transitioned to our scale logo. Now let's go back in Playmaker and let's select our scale logo state. So with that selected, what we want to do is we want to use our iTween scale 2. And in our iTween scale 2, the game object that we want to use is we want to use our logo object. The scale that we want is we want our vector scale, and we want that to go to our original logo vector 3 scale. So for a time, let's go to 0.8 seconds. And we can also add an ease type. Let's say ease out bounce. And so our finish event, we wanted to go to our next state. So let's create our next event. Let's call this one scale play button. And we're going to right click and we're going to add a global transition. And we're going to go to our finish event and we're just going to say scale play button. So for our scale play button, since we're doing pretty much the same thing, what we can do is go into our scale logo and we're going to grab that iTween scale 2 and we're just going to paste that into our scale play button transition state. And we're going to change our game object into our play button. And let's speed up this time just a bit so it goes in a little bit faster. And we can also add in a different ease type, or we can just leave that as a linear. So let's create a event and we're going to call this play button wait. And let's add that to our scene. And let's go on our finish event and we're going to change that to our play button wait. So before we set up our play button wait transition state, let's test out what we've developed so far. So if we go and look in our Playmaker, we can see that we have our fade. If we go into our variables, we can see that our original scale value hasn't been set. So let's go off play mode. So if we go into our start, we can see that we have our get scale, and let's go and see, we're going to remove our transition for now. And actually let's move our set scale because we know that it's scaling it down to 0. And if we hit play, we can see that our get scale is still set at 0. So it's not getting the scale of our game objects. Since we have a rect transform instead of a regular transform, in order to get the scale from our game objects, what we can do is we can click our logo object and we're going to grab our rect transform and we're going to drag that into our Playmaker start. And we want to go to get properties. And let's also get our play button as well. And let's grab our rect transform, do the same thing for that one and go to get properties as well. Under our property drop down, we want to go to local scale and we want the vector 3. Value that we wanted to store is our logo original scale vector 3. So we want to do the same for our play button as well. So we're going to go to our properties, local scale vector 3, and set that play button original scale vector 3. And let's drag these to the top. And now let's hit play. And we can see now we have those values stored. So let's remove our previous get scales. We can turn back on our set scale. Let's add our finish event back and let's connect it with our state 2. With all that connected, let's now go and hit play. And we can now see that our logo is scaled down. It scales right back to our original size, so we know it's storing our values, and all of our functionality so far seems to be working. So let's go to our play button wait. So in our play button wait transition state, we want to go is to our iTween, and we want to get a scale add, and we're going to add that into our button wait state. So for our game object, we want that to use our play button object. And for our vector, we can just add 0.15, or for our time, we want that to be 0.5. And for our loop type, we want that to be a ping pong because we want that to continuously happen as long as the player is on the main menu screen. So instead of a finish event, we want to use a UI button on click event. And for the button that we're going to use, we want to use our play button variable. And for the event, let's create a new event and we're just going to call this one load level. And we can right click and add that as global transition. In our load level, we're just going to add a load level action and we'll leave it blank for now. So with our load level transitional state created, let's go back to our play button wait state and we're going to say on a button click event, we want it to go to our load level state, and let's click play to test our functionality out before we continue adding the remaining functionality to our menu. So we can see we have our logo come in, we have our screen faded, we have our play button pulsing. We can see a highlight with our button component functionality, and if we click play, we can see within Playmaker that it goes to our load level event. With our basic functionality created, let's add the extra elements to our main menu to really make it pop. So the first thing that we want to add is we want to add sound to our menu. So we're going to go into our main camera game object and we're going to create 2 new game objects, and we're going to call one music audio source and we're going to call the next one sound effects audio source. And on both of these, we want to create an audio source component. So for our music audio source, since that's going to be playing throughout our menu, we can just start that out with our music track that we're going to use. So if you go to the ChopMan project file and under audio and under music, we can find some music that we can include into our project. And we're just going to drag that into our audio clip. We're going to make sure loop is on, and we're going to adjust the volume down of our music so it's not drowning out the sound effects. So after we have our two game objects created in our music within our music audio source game object, let's go back into Playmaker and let's create another variable for our audio source. So we're just going to create a game object variable, and we're just going to call that sound effects audio source obj. And we're going to drag our sound effects audio source game object into our variable value. So we want the first sound effect to start when our logo is scaling up. So we're going to add a play sound action. And for the game object, we want that to be our audio source. And for the audio clip, we could just drag in a file from our FX files. We want our next one to start once our play button scales in. So we're just going to take this and we're just going to copy it into our scale play button state. And we're just going to add another sound clip to just distinguish between these two. And with that added, now let's go into our play button wait. Let's add an action to make our background appear to move as the player is on the main menu screen. So we're going to get an iTween move add action. And let's, for our game object, let's get our background screen. And since we're really gonna just be using this in this one piece, we can just drag this into our Playmaker. So we're gonna grab our background screen image object and drag that in. And for our add, it's gonna add 0.5 and 1. And we wanna make this relatively slow. So let's add about 10 seconds. We want that to loop, so we want that to ping pong and just continue to go back and forward. And let's also slow down our play button a little bit as well. And lastly, let's have a fade before the player is brought into our scene. So let's add a camera fade. So if we can go to our fade, and we can have a fade in, we can just add that on, and we can just set that to probably about 2 seconds. So we can keep that on black, and for our finish event, we could just say go to finish. So after the fade is finished, then it's going to start a finish event, opposed to once all our actions are complete. And we can add one more piece, which is going to be the sound which when the player presses the play button. So within our level load, let's create a finish event, and we're going to get our load level. I'm going to go to our state we just created. We're going to paste that event in there. And in our load, what we're going to do is we're going to grab the play sound, and we can grab a effect, add that in there. Let's see how long our effect is, about 0.2 seconds, a little over 0.2 seconds. So let's add a wait, and we're going to make that wait 0.25 seconds. And we want that wait to go to our finished. That way the player has enough time to hear the sound before they start. And in our finish event, let's go into our scenes, and we can get the level 01 stage that we created during the stage setup video. We can paste that in our level 01 here. And we want to make sure that we also go into our build settings, and let's add our main menu. And let's add our level 01 into our build settings as well. Close that, and let's gonna save this main menu, and let's go and test out our functionality. So we have a couple just real small things we can fix real quick. We can see once our fade came in that we still had that white screen before it went to black. So we need to set our properties for the color for our black screen and our start state. And the next one was our background seemed to be moving a bit out of frame. So what we're going to do is we're going to go to our background game object and we're just going to scale that a little bit outside our scene. And we can also adjust that movement so it doesn't move as much. Let's test that out and hit play. Alright, so we can now see that we have our main menu complete with all of the sound effects and our actions. So now that we have our menus, enemies, main character, and all of our other aspects complete, let's begin creating our gameplay functionality. So in the next video, we'll begin developing our functionality for our Chomp game. So be sure to join us for the next video.
Don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell to be the first to see this and many other tutorials, game development tips, interviews, and free game asset giveaways.